July. Ichen Lobai Arserjul. The sun burned mercilessly over the Texas desert, bleaching the land until earth and sky seemed to melt into one trembling horizon. Horizon. The Spanish missionaries walked in silence, their brown habits heavy with dust, their rosaries clutched not only in prayer, but in fear. They had been warned again and again that this journey would end in blood. The Humano warriors were said to be fierce, suspicious of outsiders, quick to defend their land. Every step forward felt like a step toward martyrdom. Some whispered psalms. Others silently offered their lives to God, convinced they would never see another sunrise. Then the forest parted. Figures emerged slowly from the trees, not charging, not shouting. The friars stopped. Hands trembled. Breath caught in throats. But no arrows were raised. No spears pointed. Instead, the indigenous men, women, and children stepped into the open holding something no one expected to see. Crosses. Wooden crosses, carefully. Rosaries hung from their necks, darkened by use. Beads worn smooth by fingers that had prayed over them countless times. One of the friars dropped to his knees. The missionaries stared in disbelief. These people had never seen a white man before. No ship, no soldier, no priest had ever crossed this land. And yet the Humano people greeted them not with suspicion but with reverence. Some made the sign of the cross. Others knelt. A few whispered prayers in words the friars instantly recognized, distorted by accent yet unmistakably Christian. Jean the Father Alonso de Benavides felt the air leave his lungs. "Who taught you this?" he finally asked, his voice shaking despite years of discipline. The tribal chief stepped forward. His eyes were calm, steady, almost sorrowful, as though the answer carried a weight the friars could not yet understand. "Mat, the woman dressed in blue," he said simply. "She comes from the sky." Lands. That answer echoed through the mission for years to come. The friars questioned them again and again, certain there had to be a mistake. A traitor? A lost missionary? A deception? But the Humano people remained unwavering. The woman had appeared many times. She was young, radiant, clothed in white with a mantle the color of the open sky. She spoke their language as if born to it. She taught them prayers, instructed them gently, urged them to abandon old sacrifices and embrace a God who had given his own son. When she prayed, she spoke words they did not understand, words that sounded ancient and powerful. Latin, Mandus. She warned them that men in brown habits would come. She told them to listen. She told them not to be afraid. And then she vanished, as suddenly as she had appeared. When the friars were led to the villages, the mystery deepened. They found rosaries, chalices, sacred objects unmistakable, items no indigenous craftsman could have produced and no traveler could have brought without leaving a trace. Father Benavides wrote later that his hands shook as he held them, knowing what they meant. The harvest, as scripture says, was already prepared. But by whom? In his memorial to King Philip IV in Ichen Lobai censures, Father Benavides wrote words heavy with awe and unease. "We do not know who this woman is, but her work is evident. The harvest is ready, and it has been sown by an invisible hand, binged 8,000 kilometers away across the vast and violent Atlantic. Another life unfolded in silence." In the small town of Ágreda, on the border between Castile and Aragon, stone walls enclosed a cloister few ever entered. Inside lived Sister Maria of Jesus, abbess of the Franciscan Conceptionists. To the outside world, she was nothing remarkable. She had never traveled. She had never studied geography. She had never seen a map of the New World. Her entire universe existed within the narrow boundaries of prayer, obedience, and sacrifice. But heaven does not measure distance the way men do. The sisters of the convent had long witnessed strange things. Maria would enter prayer and remain motionless for hours, sometimes days. Her body would grow cold. Her breathing nearly ceased. At times, she seemed lifted from the ground itself, her face illuminated by something no candle could produce. They touched her hands and found her unresponsive to pain. They whispered in fear. They whispered in awe. Bland. When she returned from these ecstasies, she wept, almost with trembling humility. She confessed to her spiritual director, Fray Sebastian Marcilla, that she had been taken. Not in body, she insisted, but carried by angels. She spoke of lands she had never seen, skies of unbearable brightness, people with copper-colored skin who lived beneath a burning sun. She described their homes, their foods, their customs. She spoke of teaching them the gospel, of begging them to welcome the missionaries who would one day arrive. Fray Sebastian listened in silence, knowing the danger of such claims. In the 16th century, visions could lead to sainthood or the stake. There was no room for fantasy. Every word was weighed, every confession scrutinized. What disturbed him most was not her devotion, but her accuracy. Maria described animals unknown in Europe, plants that grew only in distant climates. She named tribes she could not possibly know. She spoke of vast plains and harsh deserts that matched no landscape in Spain. And always she described herself clothed as she was in the convent, a white tunic and a blue mantle. The lady in blue. Rumors reached the Inquisition. Superiors took notice. Investigations began. Maria was questioned relentlessly. She never changed her story, never embellished, never sought attention. She trembled under scrutiny, begging forgiveness if she was mistaken, begging God to silence the visions if they were not from him. Blanda. Then Father Benavides returned to Europe, man skeptical to the core, hardened by administration and responsibility. He had little patience for mystics, yet when he heard whispers of a nun who claimed to evangelize America without leaving her cell, something in him stirred. The details were too precise, too aligned with what he had seen with his own eyes. He traveled to Ágreda, but when he finally stood before Sister Maria, there was no triumph in her expression, only fear. She knew why he had come. She knew the weight of his testimony. He questioned her for hours, days, comparing her words to his experiences. She described tribes she had never heard named aloud. She explained rituals she could not have imagined. She spoke of the Humano people with a tenderness that broke him. At last, Father Benavides wept. What he had witnessed in the deserts of Texas, what she had lived in the silence of a cell, were two halves of the same impossible truth, a truth too unsettling to dismiss, too dangerous to proclaim loudly. This was no legend whispered around campfires. It was documented, recorded, filed in the archives of church and crown, a mystery that refuses to fade with time. Lambda, a cloistered nun who never crossed an ocean. A people who knew Christ before missionaries arrived. Kank, a woman in blue who walked between worlds. And a question that still trembles in the soul of history, How far will heaven go to reach those it loves? He arrived in Ágreda with one intention burning in his disciplined mind: to expose what he believed was either a pious exaggeration or the fragile imagination of an overly sensitive woman. Father Alonso de Benavides was not a man easily impressed. Years of governing missions, reporting directly to kings and popes, watching men die under the desert sun, had carved skepticism into his bones. Miracles, he believed, were rare, dangerous to proclaim, and even more dangerous to accept without iron proof. The story of a cloistered nun who had never left her convent yet, claimed to walk among indigenous tribes across an ocean. offended his reason. If the faith was to survive, it had to be protected from illusion. The meeting between the veteran missionary and the cloistered abbess was quiet, almost anticlimactic in appearance, yet it would become one of the most unsettling encounters in church history. Sister Maria of Jesus entered the parlor with her eyes lowered, hands folded inside the sleeves of her habit. There was no trace of triumph in her posture, no eagerness to convince. If anything, she looked afraid. Father Benavides noted this immediately. Fraudsters, he knew, crave attention. This woman seemed to dread it, he began carefully. Not with accusations, but with questions. Questions designed to entangle. Questions whose answers could not be guessed. He asked about the geography of New Spain, the rivers, the direction of their flow, the way the land rose and fell. He expected hesitation. He expected vagueness. Instead, Sister Maria answered softly and precisely. She spoke of waterways that curved like serpents through the plains, of villages clustered near water, because the sun punished those who strayed too far. She described distances not in miles, but in days of walking, exactly as the missionaries measured them. And Father Benavides felt the first crack in his certainty. He pressed harder. He asked about climate, about seasons, about the sudden cold nights that followed brutal heat. She nodded gently, as if recalling something intimate. She spoke of wind that carried sand like needles with needles, of skies so vast they made prayer feel small and infinite at once. She described how the people wrapped themselves against the cold after sunset, how fires became places of teaching. Then, without being prompted, she looked up. "Father," she said, her voice steady, "I have seen you." Bond. The room seemed to tighten around them. "I saw you as you baptized the Piro people. There were many that day. You were tired. You wore a white alb with a stole embroidered in red and gold. You lifted your hands often, because the children kept pulling at your habit." Bon. Father Benavides felt the blood drain from his face. That ceremony had taken place years earlier, deep in territory no European woman had ever entered. The vestments she described were not ordinary ones. He had worn them only once, borrowed for a feast day, and had never spoken of it. The detail about the children tugging at his habit struck him like a blow. No report mentioned it. No letter recorded it. Only someone present could know. His questions faltered, but she did not stop. She spoke of a meeting with 2 Jumano chiefs. She described their faces with careful respect. One, she said, stood tall and spoke little. The other had a squint, blind in one eye, his gaze sharp and weary. At those words, Father Benavides had to grip the arm of his chair. He knew that chief. He had sat across from him, negotiated with him, watched the light shift across that damaged eye. No portrait existed. No written description had ever been sent to Spain. In his heart, something began to break open, terrifying and luminous. Later, in his report to Pope Urban VIII, Father Benavides would write with trembling honesty that he had been convinced against his will that this woman had been there. Not, perhaps, in her physical body, but in a manner known only to God. That she had described his mission more accurately than he himself could have done. And yet he confessed his fear, asking how such a thing could be possible without unraveling everything he understood about the natural order. The mystical theology had a word for it. Bilocation. Not the splitting of the body. Not a trick of illusion, but a rare grace by which God allows a person's presence to be manifested in 2 places at once. In one place, the body remains still, absorbed in prayer or ecstasy. In the other, the person appears fully present, speaking, teaching, acting, seen and heard by others. Saints before her had been associated with it. Anthony of Padua, Martin de Porres. Centuries later, Padre Pio would bear the same mysterious mark. Sister Maria herself spoke of it with reluctance. She said she never sought it, that it exhausted her, that each journey felt like being torn between worlds. Whence, she recorded in her diaries that between each and Lobite Arsasand, each and Lobite Censor E, she was carried more than 500 times, sometimes briefly, sometimes for what felt like days. She said the angels did not ask her permission. They responded to a fire already burning in her soul. Why did she go? Her writings answer quietly. She wrote that her heart burned with love for souls who did not know God, that when she prayed for them, distance ceased to exist, that she begged God to send laborers into the harvest. And instead, he sent her. She did not speak of heroism. She spoke of obedience, of being unable to refuse love when it demanded everything. The Germano people did not know theology. They did not debate doctrine, but they recognized something deeper. They recognized holiness. They recognized a presence that did not seek power or land, but their souls. They listened because they felt seen. When the missionaries finally arrived, exactly as the lady in blue had promised, the people were ready. The signs had been taught. The prayers already lived in their memory. And there is a detail that remains as quiet as it is profound. When Sister Maria learned that the missionaries had arrived, that baptisms had taken place, that the gospel was now spoken openly among those people, the journey stopped. The bilocations ceased. Her task was finished. Like John the Baptist, she had prepared the way. She withdrew again into silence, content to disappear now that Christ had been proclaimed. Some dismissed the story as invention, a tale crafted by priests to inspire devotion. But the evidence resists easy dismissal. A land. The first proof lies in the very institution most feared for skepticism, the Spanish Inquisition. Sister Maria was investigated rigorously. Days of interrogation, repeated examinations. They searched for heresy, delusion, deception. In an era where false mystics were swiftly condemned, she was released. Not celebrated, not promoted, but judged sincere and orthodox. And the second proof lies not in European archives, but in indigenous memory. Even today, Native communities in Texas and New Mexico pass down the story of the Blue Lady, not as a foreign legend imposed by missionaries, but as part of their own history. Elders speak of a woman who came before the priests, who spoke gently, who warned and prepared. In the fields of Texas bloom bluebonnets, lupins said by local tradition to have taken their color from her mantle when it brushed the earth. Legend, perhaps. Yet legends do not survive 4 centuries unless they answer something deep. The third proof is her mind. Sister Maria of Agreda was not known only for this mystery. She authored The Mystical City of God, a vast and intricate work on the life of the Virgin Mary, written without formal theological education, yet praised by saints and popes. Its language is refined, its structure disciplined, its theology coherent. Madness does not produce such clarity, And then there is the final sign that unsettles even the modern skeptic. When her body was exhumed in Ichenjobite Lingzhou, centuries after her death, it was found incorrupt, preserved, resting as though asleep. Today it remains in the convent of Ágreda, untouched by decay, as if the body that God once used to cross oceans without moving was itself preserved as testimony. This story is told now not to escape the darkness of our age, but to confront it. We live in a world where evil often seems louder than faith, where borders close, where belief retreats. Yet history whispers another truth. God is not limited by geography, by politics, by time. When a soul searches, he finds a way. Sometimes through dreams, sometimes through persecution, sometimes through a nun kneeling in a stone cell with nothing but a rosary and a heart that refuses to stop loving. Brown Sister Maria had no ships, no maps, no voice beyond the walls of her convent, and yet her prayer reached deserts she would never see with human eyes. Her faith crossed oceans no body could survive. With nothing but obedience and trust, she altered the history of a people, And the question her life leaves hanging is not about the past. It presses into the present, demanding to be answered in the quiet of our own hearts. How much do we believe that prayer still moves where we cannot go? And so the mystery does not end in the archives of Rome, nor in the silent corridors of a Spanish convent, nor even in the sun-scorched deserts of Texas. It continues, wherever a human heart dares to believe that heaven is closer than it appears. Because the true weight of this story is not carried by dates, documents, or miracles alone, but by what it reveals about the hidden movement of God in the world. And Sister Maria of Jesus never stood on a stage. She never preached to crowds. She never knew fame during her lifetime. Most of the world never heard her name. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling part. God did not choose a conqueror, a bishop, or a scholar to prepare an entire people for the gospel. He chose a woman hidden behind stone walls, bound by obedience, stripped of movement, whose greatest act was to kneel and pray until love itself became a force that crossed oceans. Bland in her cell, time passed slowly. Bells rang, candles burned down. Seasons changed beyond the walls she would never cross. Yet while her body remained enclosed, her prayer moved freely, as if space itself bent before it. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for us, because it leaves no excuse. We cannot say we are too small. We cannot say we are too far. We cannot say we are powerless. And the Germano people were reached before anyone thought they could be reached. They were prepared before history thought it possible. And they recognized Christ not through argument, but through love embodied in a mysterious visitor who asked nothing for herself. She did not conquer. She did not threaten. She simply appeared, spoke truth, and disappeared again, leaving behind a hunger for something more. Phalanges. That hunger is the fingerprint of God. Planda. When we look at the world today, it is tempting to believe that faith is losing ground, that darkness advances faster than light, that prayer has become a weak answer to overwhelming problems. Yet history, when read carefully, tells a different story. It tells us that God often does his most decisive work invisibly, that the loudest victories are not always the most important ones, that before great movements appear on the surface of history, something quiet and hidden has already prepared the way. Blemdia. Somewhere right now someone is praying without knowing how far that prayer will travel. Somewhere, someone believes their small faith does not matter. Somewhere, someone kneels in silence while the world rushes past, convinced they are doing nothing at all. And yet heaven counts differently. Sister Maria never knew how many souls she touched. She never counted conversions. She never measured success. She trusted. She obeyed. She loved. And when her task was complete, she faded again into obscurity, content to be forgotten if Christ was remembered. Belend. That is the final lesson she leaves us. God does not need our strength as much as our surrender. He does not need our reach as much as our willingness. When we offer him what little we think we have, he multiplies it beyond our imagination. He crosses borders we cannot cross. He enters hearts we will never meet. He prepares deserts to bloom long before anyone arrives. To see the flowers. Comment. The lady in blue no longer walks the plains of Texas. The convent bells of Ágreda ring over a quieter world. But the truth her life reveals remains alive. Prayer is not an escape from reality. It is one of the most powerful forces within it. It bends time. It crosses oceans. It reaches places where bodies cannot go. And if that was true 400 years ago, it is no less true now. What remains is the invitation. Not to witness a miracle, but to become part of the hidden work that makes miracles possible. To believe that when we kneel, heaven listens. To trust that love offered in silence is never wasted. To dare to live as though God truly has no limits. And because somewhere, perhaps in a place we will never see, a soul may already be holding a cross, waiting for the moment when what was prepared in secret finally steps into the light.